Hello, I'm Kimmy, and my presentation was on the life of Frederick Douglass. Pretty much everyone has heard the name Frederick Douglass. Most people know that he was a slave and he managed to free himself. He also became an abolitionist leader after he freed himself, and he helped the African Americans during the Civil War. Douglass was born into slavery in 1818, and when he was at a young age, he was taken from his mother, and he never knew his father. Some people felt that one of his slave masters was his father, because sometimes the masters would have relations with the slaves and end up getting them pregnant. He had many masters. His most memorable master was named Plummer. In Douglass's autobiography, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, he stated that Mr. Plummer was a miserable drunkard and a savage monster. Later, when he was 12, he began learning how to read and write by the wife of his master in Baltimore, Hugh Auld. Hugh Auld wasn't happy about his wife teaching him to read and write, so he made the lesson stop. But behind his back, Douglass would learn to continue learning by the other children. Once he learned to read and write, he would share his ability with others, like slaves, to help them learn. When he was about 18, he worked in a local shipyard in Baltimore, and this is where he attempted to escape from slavery. He knew that in order to be free, he needed what were called free papers in order to free himself. In an article that he wrote, he stated that it was a custom in Maryland to require the free colored people to have what were called free papers. On the papers, there were the names of the slaves, ages, color, weight, and a description of the free man, which included any scars or markings. This made sharing papers a little easy for slaves. More than one slave could be found with the same general description. Slaves would borrow free papers from a freed slave until the slave managed to make it to a free state and then return the papers to the original owner. However, if a slave were to be caught with another freed man's papers, both the fugitive and his friend would be heavily punished. As he escaped, Douglass disguised himself as a sailor and found his way to a train station, which was heading north, and he began his free life in New York City. Once he finally settled down as a free man with his wife in 1838, he began to share his story during an abolitionist meeting. He also became an anti-slavery lecturer. He gave his speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society Convention after his first autobiography publication in 1845. He traveled overseas to share his story. Douglass also became a supporter for women's rights. He was the only African American to attend the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls. He made an argument that he did not want the right to vote if women were not allowed to have the right as well. When President Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation, it allowed him to create the army that he wanted, and it allowed African Americans to serve in the Civil War. The number of African American volunteers was shockingly low, so Lincoln asked Douglass to help spread the word and recruit soldiers. Douglass played a huge role in the war. He had a big influence on the African Americans who served in the war. Douglass also made his own proclamation, which stated, "I urge you to fly to arms and smite with death the power that would bury the government and your liberty in the same hopeless grave." He also managed to get the African Americans the treatment that they deserve, and he helped them get equal pay with the white soldiers who served as well. And then by 1863, the first U.S. colored regiment was sent to serve in Washington, and by the end of the war, there was over 180,000 African Americans in the Union Army. Frederick Douglass had a hard beginning, from being born into slavery into managing to free himself. He not only helped himself, but he also helped other slaves and African Americans to have a better life. Douglass played an important role in the war by recruiting and fighting for equal rights for the soldiers. He became an important figure of his lifetime.